Hello everyone and good morning. I'm Sarah Warno, the Chief Executive of the King's Fund, and I would like to welcome you all to the second day of our annual conference this morning. I'm delighted to see so many new as well as some more familiar faces. Our conference themes this year are challenge, change and hope, and they feel particularly pertinent to the first session this morning. We also promised attendees an agenda packed full of interesting and influential speakers and relevant content. And I think we've delivered on that this morning. It's my honour to welcome the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Wes Streeting, and the other members of our Health and Social Care Ministerial team to the King's Fund today. And I'm delighted to also welcome Lord Aradazi, author of the hugely important and comprehensive independent investigation of the National Health Service in England, which is published today. Lord Darzi's review is a sobering and incredibly honest articulation of what many patients have known for some time and that we hear about regularly at the Fund. It absolutely sets out the challenges we face. We know that services are stretched to breaking point, staff are struggling, and people are losing faith that support will be there when they need it. In March, we published the latest British Social Attitudes Survey, showing the lowest level of satisfaction with the NHS ever recorded. And as I and colleagues visit different places and parts of our health and care system, we hear of difficult experiences every day. For example, I was talking to someone in their 70s with a long-term lung condition who for the first time in their life had paid for a private GP appointment as they were struggling to get the regular appointments they felt they needed at their GP practice. We can't go on as we are, we need change. We need bold, decisive action, not only to improve our NHS, but for the wider health and social care ecosystem. And our vision at the King's Fund is that the best possible health and care is available to all patients and people. We know from our work that there is a huge desire to make care closer to home a reality. But for this, we need greater investment in the primary and community services that support people before they end up needing hospital treatment, that prioritise prevention and early diagnosis. And in our published work, we talk about the need to move the spotlight and some of the focus, money and infrastructure that goes with it, from acute hospital care to our communities, primary care, much closer to people's homes. Lord Darzi's report recognises the broader poor state of the nation's health, and we've published extensively on this. Life expectancy has stalled over the past decade. In some groups, it's gone backwards. And on a visit to West London Trust last week, I spent time with the mental health teams talking about the increasing numbers of people seeking their help. They reflected on the social context fueling some of this. The poor quality housing, the unemployment, rising levels of poverty. And we know from our work with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and cited by Lord Darzi in his report, if you are poor, you are likely to live in worse health, die younger, live more years of life in poor health and find it harder to access NHS services. And Chris Van Tulleken, or one half of Operation Ouch, as he's better known in my house, reminded us yesterday here at the conference that a quarter of 10 and 11-year-olds are obese, and it's a stat that always shocks me. We need to pay urgent attention to our public health and creating environments that give children a great start and help us all to live healthier lives. It's also impossible to consider the health of the NHS without acknowledging the deep challenges in social care, which is long overdue reform. At the King's Fund, we publish Social Care 360 every year to provide a status update on our care system. And the bottom line is that more people are requesting care and fewer are able to access it, putting huge pressure on families and leaving people in really difficult situations. We need change. I'm so pleased that Lord Darzi's report talks extensively about the importance of valuing our NHS staff and our social care staff. We do work here at the King's Fund in the health and care system on culture and leadership with leaders. And we hear every day about the moral injury that staff face. They want to do a good job, but it's increasingly hard to do so. So we need to change to value our staff and equip them effectively to do the jobs they've come into the health service to do. The final theme of our conference is hope. And we have, over the past day, heard some brilliant and hopeful stories of staff doing great things. For example, to better integrate care, wrap it around people and patients, or to innovate with new treatments and technologies up and down the country. We've also heard from patients and communities who've really made their voices heard to improve services, most vividly this week in the work we published on the healthcare response to the Grenfell fire. So although today is a day to reflect on the challenges we face and the change that we need, we are hopeful too that change is coming and that by working in partnership, we can deliver a better healthcare system for all of us, one that is there in our most difficult and our most joyful human moments. And with that, I'm delighted to welcome the Prime Minister to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was fantastic. Thank you, Sarah, for that introduction. Thank you. That was a really powerful introduction and really thought-provoking as well, with some of those statistics in there. And thank you all for being here. Probably, actually, I should say thank you for letting me gate crash your conference. You were here anyway. It's me that's come along. But it is really good to come and join you on day 2. And I hear you had a really good day yesterday, and I hope today is just as good as that. As you've heard today, Lord Darzi has published his independent report on the state of our NHS. It is an incredibly comprehensive analysis. Some of you will have seen it. There's copies available. Please read it. It is a raw and honest assessment. That's what we asked for. And that's why I wanted to come here to the King's Fund, home to many of our country's leading healthcare experts, because your contributions are going to be vital as we get this precious institution back on its feet and build an NHS that is truly fit for the future. And look, our starting point couldn't be further from that goal. Public satisfaction in the NHS has fallen from an all-time high when the last Labour government left office to an all-time low today. Think of the impact that has on the staff who put in so much day in, day out, knowing that confidence is at an all-time low. And that's because, as everybody in the country knows, the last government broke the NHS. Until this morning, we didn't know the full scale of the damage, which is laid bare in the report. Even Lord Darzi, with all his years of experience, is shocked by what is discovered. It is unforgivable. And people have every right to be angry. Not just because the NHS is so personal to all of us, or because when people can't get the care they need, they're off work sick, with huge cost to our economy. It's because some of these failings are literally life and death. Take the waiting times in A&E. More than 100,000 infants waited more than 6 hours last year. And nearly 1/10 of all patients are now waiting for 12 hours or more. That's not just a source of fear and anxiety. It's leading to thousands of avoidable deaths. And that phrase, avoidable deaths, should always be chilling. That's people's loved ones who could have been saved. Doctors and nurses whose whole vocation is to save them, hampered from doing so. It's devastating, heartbreaking, infuriating. And that's just scratching the surface. High-risk heart attack patients waiting too long for urgent treatment. Cancer diagnosing, waiting too long, with cancer death rates higher than in other countries. And when it comes to getting help for mental health, 345,000 are waiting over a year. That's roughly the entire population of Leicester. And look, here's the crucial point. The Tories would have you believe that all of this is because of a once-in-a-generation pandemic. But today's report clearly shows that this is just not true. COVID hit our NHS harder than healthcare systems in other countries. The NHS delayed, cancelled or postponed far more routine care during the pandemic than any comparable health system. And why? Because our NHS went into the pandemic in a much more fragile state. Fewer doctors, fewer nurses, fewer beds than most other high-income health systems. And let's be really clear about what caused that. That ideologically driven top-down reorganisation of 2012 from the former Health Secretary Andrew Lansley, hopelessly misconceived, cost a fortune, and then all had to be reversed. It's what Lord Darzi describes as a calamity without international precedent, a scorched earth approach to health reform, the effects of which are still being felt today. And at the same time, they inflicted what the report describes as the most austere decade since the NH was founded. Crumbling buildings, decrepit porter cabins, mental health patients in Victorian-era cells infested with vermin. When we say they broke the NHS, that's not performative politics. Just look at it. The 2010s were a lost decade for our NHS. A lost decade in which the Conservatives left the NHS unable to be there for patients today and totally unprepared for the challenges and opportunities of tomorrow. And it's not just the state of our National Health Service in crisis. It's also the state of our national health. We're becoming a sicker society, spending more of our lives in ill health than 10 years ago. There are 2.8 million people economically inactive because of long-term sickness. As today's report makes clear, the NHS is not contributing to national prosperity as it could. Getting people back to health and work would not only reduce the costs on the NHS, it would help drive economic growth and fund public services. But perhaps Lord Darzi's most damning finding is about the declining physical and mental health of our children. Fewer children getting vaccinated, while those from the most deprived backgrounds are twice as likely to be obese by reception age. Twice as likely. Much of this is a direct result of wider social injustices, poor quality housing, lower incomes, insecure employment. All of it not just damaging the health of our nation, it's piling up the pressures on our NHS. So that's the report. But look, I haven't come here just to set out this appalling inheritance, though it is really important that we know it and properly understand it in detail. But my Labour government was elected on a mandate for change. So I'm also here to talk about how together we can fix it. I feel very profoundly the responsibility for this, and indeed the opportunity of this moment. The NHS may be broken, but it's not beaten. As the report says, the NHS may be in a critical condition, but its vital signs are strong. And we need to have the courage to deliver long-term reform. Major surgery, not sticking plasters. We've got to face up to the challenges. Look at our ageing society, the higher burden of disease. And so the NHS is at a fork in the road. And we have a choice about how it should meet those demands. Don't act and leave it to die. Raise taxes on working people, or reform to secure its future. Now, working people can't afford to pay more, so it's reform or die. So let me be clear from the outset what reform does not mean. First, it does not mean abandoning those founding ideals of a public service, publicly funded, free at the point of use. the basic principle of dignity, inspired, of course, by Bevan, that when you fall ill, you should never have to worry about the bill. That is as true today as when the NHS was founded 76 years ago. And I believe in that very deeply. As some of you will know, my mum and my sister both worked in the NHS. My wife works in the NHS. And the NHS cared for my mum throughout what was a very long illness. So the NHS runs through my family like a stick of rock. But you know, this isn't just about emotion. It's about hard facts too. The NHS is uniquely placed for the opportunities of big data and predictive and preventative medicine. So the problem isn't that the NHS is the wrong model. It's the right model. It's just not taking advantage of the opportunities in front of it. And that's what we need to change. Second, reform does not mean just putting more money in. Now, of course, even in difficult financial circumstances, a Labour government will always make the investment in our NHS that is needed, always. But we have to fix the plumbing before turning on the taps. So hear me when I say this. No more money without reform. I'm not prepared to see even more of your money spent on agency staff who cost £5,000 a shift, on appointment letters which arrive after the appointment, or on paying for people to be stuck in hospital just because they can't get the care they need in the community. And tonight, there'll be 12,000 patients in that very position. That's enough to fill 28 hospitals. So we can't go on like this. As Lord Darzi has said, NHS staff are working harder than ever, but productivity has fallen because patients can't be discharged. Clinicians are spending their time trying to find beds rather than treating more patients. That isn't just solved by more money, it's solved by reform. And third, reform does not mean trying to fix everything from Whitehall. It really doesn't. When Lord Darzi says there are vital signs of the NHS and they're strong, he's talking about the talents and passions of our NHS workforce. That's what he's talking about. The breadth and depth of clinical talent, the extraordinary compassion and care of our NHS staff. If we're going to build an NHS that's fit for the future, then I tell you, we're going to do it with our NHS staff and with our patients too. We're going to change it together. Now that starts with the first steps, the 40,000 extra appointments every week. But we've also got to do the hard yards of long-term reform. So this government is working at pace to build a 10-year plan. Something so different from anything that's gone before. This plan will be framed around 3 big shifts, 3 fundamental reforms, which are rooted in what Lord Darzi has set out today. First, moving from an analogue to a digital NHS. We can already see glimpses of the extraordinary potential of technology, like the world's first ever non-invasive, knifeless surgery for kidney cancer. Just imagine that. It's pioneered by Leeds teaching hospitals. Or the precision cancer scanners. I saw some of them yesterday. Or simply transforming how we manage a condition. We went to Kingsmill Hospital earlier this year and met a 12-year-old girl called Molly. She's using her smartphone to monitor her glucose levels, instead of being forced to repeatedly prick her fingers. It made such a difference to her daily life and gave great reassurance to her mum, who could remotely check on the settings and the findings. So we've got to make these opportunities available to everyone. We've got to use technology to empower patients and give them much greater control over their healthcare. Take an innovation like the NHS app. this could be a whole digital front door to the NHS. Appointments, self-referral, reminders for checkups and screenings, patients in control of their own data, healthcare so much more transparent, so you always know your options and the standards that you should expect. And you know, earlier this year I went to Alderhay Hospital. Many of you will know it. It's a fantastic hospital where they carry out heart surgery on infants, which is really humbling to see. And I met the parents of a 2-year-old who'd had extremely complicated heart surgery. Tiny infant, incredible surgery. I asked the parents about their child's history and conditions. How did he come to be here? What's the story behind this? And as they told me, I could see them welling up as they went through the history, the conditions, all the background. And then they told me that every time they went to a different hospital, they had to go through all of that over and over again. They really struggled to tell the story, and they had to do it every single time because the records weren't held electronically. So we've got to have fully digital patient records so that crucial information is there for you whenever you go to the NHS. And while I'm on technology, we're also going to throw the full weight of the British government behind our world-leading life sciences. Second, and Sarah mentioned this, we've got to shift more care from hospitals to communities. Now, the King's Fund has long called for this. Successive governments have repeatedly promised it. But what's happened? The opposite. The share of the NHS budget spent on hospitals has actually increased. Now, this 10-year plan has to be the moment that we change that, the moment we begin to turn our national health service into a neighbourhood health service. That means more tests, scans, healthcare offered on high streets and town centres, improved GP access, bringing back the family doctor, offering digital consultations for those that want them, virtual wards, and more patients safely looked after in their own homes, where we can deal with problems early before people are off work sick and before they need to go to hospital. And we have to make good on the integration of health and social care, so we can discharge those 26 hospital worth of patients, saving money, reducing the strain on our NHS, and giving people better treatment. And third, in terms of the shifts, we have got to be much bolder in moving from sickness to prevention. Now, we've already announced NHS health checks in workplaces, blood pressure checks at dentists and opticians. But that's just the beginning. Planning for 10 years means we can make long-term investments in new technologies that will help catch and prevent problems earlier. And there are some areas in particular where we've just got to be more ambitious, like children's mental health or children's dentistry. You know, one of the most shocking things that I saw, this was actually when I was at Alderhay Hospital again, I mentioned the heart operations, but whilst I was there talking to the staff, it became clear that the single biggest cause of children going into that hospital between the ages of 6 and 10 was to have their rotting teeth taken out. I couldn't believe it. I was genuinely shocked. All politicians say they're shocked too often, but I was really shocked. The single biggest cause of going into hospital, 6 to 10-year-olds, have your teeth taken out. Can you think of anything more soul-destroying? For the children, what a price to pay. For that brilliant NHS team who want to use their talents to save lives, spending their time taking out rotting teeth, something that could so easily have been prevented. And look, I know some prevention measures will be controversial, but I'm prepared to be bold even in the face of loud opposition. So no, some of our changes won't be universally popular. We know that. But I will do the right thing for our NHS, our economy, and our children. Now, the task before us is the work of our generation. We've already hit the ground running, negotiating an end to the strikes, which the Tories refused to do, strikes which were costing us a fortune. And we inherited 1,000 trainee GPs who were set to graduate into unemployment. Instead, we've hired them. But only fundamental reform and a plan for the long term can turn around the NHS and build a healthy society. Now, it won't be easy. It won't be quick. It will take a 10-year plan, not just the work of one parliament. But I know we can do it because we've done reform before. The last Labour government reformed the NHS to deliver better outcomes for patients and better value for taxpayers. Conservative governments then undid that good work, which only goes to prove once again that only a Labour government can reform the NHS. And my Labour government has a huge mandate for change. We're mission-driven. And I think the themes of this conference today are fitting for this moment. Challenge, change, and hope. Because the challenge is clear before us. The change could amount to the biggest reimagining of the NHS since its birth. And the hope, well, that's what's really exciting and galvanising about this moment. Because if we get this right, people can look back and say, this was the generation that took the NHS from the worst crisis in its history, got it back on its feet, and made it fit for the future. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a number of media questions, so bear with me as we go through. I've got the BBC first, Hugh.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You talk about shifting resources into community health care, improving technology and prevention of ill health. But these ideas have been talked about for some time. Some progress has already been made. What's new and different about your reform ideas?
That we've got a raw and honest assessment of where we're really at, that we're clear-eyed about this, meaning we need a 10-year plan, not a short-term set of decisions, and that we've got the mandate for change to carry this through. Because what's happened in the past is there's been talk about change, sometimes steps towards change, then steps back again, but not what I would call mission-driven, this driving sense of purpose to get the NHS not just on its feet, but fit for the future. And what drives that is this sense of the future. In the Labour Party, we look back so proudly at what we did 76 years ago. I want people in generations to look back so proudly at what this Labour government of 2024 did. So it's that determination, this drive, my personal mission, Wes's mission, to see this through with a mandate for real change. Thank you, Hugh. Can I go to Ashish, please, from Sky?
Good morning, Prime Minister.
Morning.
Thank you. Lord Darzy's conclusion is that there is no quick fix for the NHS. It's going to cost time and money. That's money you don't have, and it's time sick and suffering patients can't afford. If you were to speak to one single patient who's been suffering in agony for so long, what would you say to him or her about how you're going to fix the NHS and make them better in the short term?
I'm going to say we're going to fix this with the first steps, but we're going to do the long-term change. I accept your challenge, and it's repeatedly put to me, which is the long-term change takes too long, so tell me what you're going to do this Christmas, because we'll have an NHS crisis, and that's a good challenge. The trouble is, for the last 10 years, we're going round and round in circles. So we do short-term stuff to just about get the NHS through the winter crisis, because there's one every year, they're just bigger than the last one, but we never do the long-term. We go round and round, it gets worse and worse. So I accept the challenge to me, which is it's going to take a long time. It's going to be measured in years, not months. And we need to have something to say for someone who's ill now, which is getting the NHS back on its feet. But we can't duck the long-term change. That's the problem. It's what I call sticking plaster politics, which is knowing that you need to do big change, thinking it's going to take too long, so I won't do it, I'll put it off. I'll just do little bits here, patch things over, and guess what? It just gets worse. That is one of the big mistakes, in my view, of the last 14 years, and we're not going to repeat it. So yes, we need to answer to those that are ill now, but we also need to answer to those that are going to be ill in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and we've got to do the long-term change. Thank you. Harry from ITV.
Morning, Prime Minister. A question on another important topic, if I may. Gerald Hamilton, former sub-postmaster, has said that almost all sub-postmasters wrongly convicted by the Post Office are yet to receive their full compensation. Nothing has changed, he says, under your government. Why is your new government seemingly still dragging its feet on delivering the compensation to these sub-postmasters that they're entitled to?
Well, look, we've made a commitment in relation to this compensation, and we will keep to that commitment. Obviously, you know, almost everywhere we look, there's a bigger problem than we anticipated. Everything, pretty well, has been broken by the last government, so we are getting on with this as quickly as we can. But I did make that commitment. I stick by that commitment. We'll get on with this just as quickly as we can. Thank you, Harry. Victoria from Channel 4.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You talked earlier about integration of health and social care, and you also talked about the people stuck in hospital tonight who don't need to be there. When is your government going to tell us what your plans are for reforming social care?
Well, we need a national care service. That is our ambition. That's the work that we will start on. I want this to be done as consensually as possible because it's difficult. I want to be cross-party. I want to involve as many people as possible. I genuinely think that the start for care is with the staff, and that's why we'll have a fair pay agreement for staff, because without the staff we can't make the change that we need. My sister, by the way, works in the care sector, so I know this pretty well. So we want that national service. We will start with the staff and build up from there with a vehicle for the consensus that we need. But the challenge is absolutely right. We have to fix social care, because I don't think it's possible to build an NHS for the future if we don't fix social care as we do it. And that makes the challenge greater. But the point of this report and the 10-year plan really is to look beyond just the NHS itself and broaden it out. And social care is obviously part of that 10-year plan. Thank you. Olivia from GB News.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Professor John Bell said this morning that doctors in the BMA have been a major drag on reforming healthcare. Do you predict that the BMA will now embrace productivity reform with open arms?
Well, look, I've said we'll do this with the staff, and we will. But I know from my old job running the Crown Prosecution Service that whenever you try to reform anything, there will be some people, I'm afraid, who will say, oh, don't do that, it's better as it is, I wouldn't do that, keep things as they are. We have to take that attitude on, in my view. It's an inhibitor of change. So whilst we say we will do it with people, and we will, do it together, and we will, I know in my heart of hearts we will meet pockets of people who will say, don't do it, slow down, go over there, not over there, leave things as they are. We have to take that on, and we will take that on. That's part and parcel of the change that we need to bring about. Thank you. I've got Natasha from LBC.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Lord Darzi says this is obviously going to take a very long time to fix. Do you expect it to take 2 terms? And what will you learn from the botched Lansley reforms to make sure that yours are not as dreadful as his?
Well, a lot. Where to start? Totally misconceived, totally done from the top down, and no real sense of where they were going. It was, I think, they were stripping the money out of the NHS, and Lord Darzi touches on this, and pretended that these top-down reforms were going to somehow make up. We are not going to make that mistake. In answer to the first part of your question, yes, it's going to take time. That's why it's a 10-year plan. And I know that, obviously parliamentary terms are 5 years. But again, one of the problems in politics is politicians pretending you can fix everything before the next election. This is going to take 10 years. That's why I want to be invitational about it, because I want everybody on that journey so that it's enduring change. But is it going to take a decade? Yes, it will take a decade to do it properly. We'll obviously see the results as we go along, make the improvements as we go along, and that will be very uplifting. But it is going to take more than one parliamentary term. Thank you. Chris from The Times.
Thank you. Lord Darzi is very clear that the crisis is not just in the NHS, it is in the broader health of the nation, and prevention is not just about the health service, it's about what the whole of government and society can do. So you said you're shocked by this, you said you're prepared to take bold and controversial action here, and you've signalled on things like smoking what that might look like. Can we expect similar changes for things like obesity, inactivity, poor diet, social media, all the other drivers of ill health, both physical and mental, and what will that look like?
We have to go to the preventative model. I'm absolutely convinced about that. And that will be part of the 10-year plan. I think it can take different forms. You mentioned smoking. Obviously, I think it's 88,000 deaths a year from smoking. Huge imposition on the NHS, awful for the individuals. And that's only the cases that end up in death. I have to say that the teeth decay was a real shocker for me. I didn't appreciate until I was at Alderhay that things were so bad that more children were going in to have their teeth taken out than anything else. And that is a very easily preventable disease. But of course, there's diet, there's healthy lifestyle, etc. We are going to have to get into that space because we've got more and more conditions. We're living for longer. This is a good thing. But simply putting more and more money into the NHS as it currently is configured isn't going to work. We need preventative measures as well, and we'll set those out in the 10-year plan. And obviously, I know some of them will be welcome, and I know some of them will be controversial. They always are, but unless we shift the model, I don't think we can bring about the change that we need. Thank you, Chris. Sophie from the Mirror.
Hi, Prime Minister. So you say it's going to take 10 years to fix the NHS. Does that mean people will continue to sit in A&E for hours on end for 10 years? Can you tell those people when they'll see a difference in their experiences?
Well, we're already on this in terms of the early steps that we want to take. A&E, Lord Darzi and I discussed this, I think, on Monday of this week. A&E is a classic example of where we need more technology. Because anybody who's been in A&E, and some of you will have been, or knows people have been, you wait a very, very long time. Mainly, you're waiting for the results of tests because the technology isn't quick enough. So you go in, you wait a while to have a test, and then you wait forever for the test to come back before you go on to the next stage. So some of this we can start to change more quickly. Because I accept that whilst the overall change needs a 10-year plan, we've got to show the change along the way. I think A&E, or a large part of the answer for A&E, is what we do with technology, much better use of technology and tests and being able to get those test results back much, much more quickly. Thank you. I've got Noah from The Sun.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Given you caved to train drivers, junior doctors and teachers, how can Sun readers really expect you personally to stand up to resistance from the NHS unions to reform?
Because I've reformed before. I reformed when I was heading up the Crown Prosecution Service. I wanted to change it to make it much more victim-oriented. And we faced huge challenge, we took it on, and we changed it. I wanted to drive up conviction rates for violence against women and girls. We faced resistance about how we were doing it. We burst through that and made the change. So I could give any number of examples. I worked in Northern Ireland where we had to create a new police service in Northern Ireland. There was resistance, but we pressed on and did it. When I arrived as leader of the Labour Party, I knew we had to change it. There was a lot of resistance, but we pressed on and did it. So if there's one sort of common theme of what I've done for a living for some time now, it's coming in and bringing about change, and I'm determined that we will bring about the change here. Thank you. Laura from The Telegraph.
Prime Minister, in the Darzi report, he said that the NHS had been starved of capital funding and that lack of kit and tools meant that medics are wasting a lot of time. Given one of the first actions under your government was pay increases for junior doctors, and we've got GPs now threatening to strike, isn't anything extra going to be soaked up by staff?
No, I was struck by what Lord Darzi said about capital funding, which I think was really profound, and obviously that has to be part of the 10-year plan in terms of the investment and where we put it. But look, simply continuing with strike action in the NHS was not going to fix the NHS. Continue with strike action. We had, I think, 3 million days lost a year under the last Prime Minister, every year, to strike action. I don't think that you can grow the economy. I don't think that you can fix the health service whilst you carry on with that kind of strike action. So actually what we did was come in, do the sensible thing, fix it, and now we're able to get on and launch our 10-year plan. I couldn't stand here and say there's a 10-year plan whilst we still didn't have the workforce at work getting on with the job. So it's a vital part of rebuilding as we go forward. Thank you. Eleni from The Guardian.
Thank you, Prime Minister. One of the Chancellor's first acts was to put a pause on the previous government's plans to build 40 new hospitals by 2030. Isn't that a case of the kind of damaging short-term thinking that this report talks about? And can you tell us today, are you still committed to building all new 40 hospitals?
Yes, we are. Let me explain why we put it on pause to review. Because the last government went on and on and on about 40 new hospitals, which sounds great. There weren't 40, they weren't new, and many of them weren't hospitals. And the programme was undeliverable. This is exactly what's wrong with politics, because no wonder people lose faith in politics if they're told over and over again, you're going to get a brand new hospital, and it's not happening. So we reviewed it, we will deliver against it, but I want a realistic timetable delivery so I can look people in the eye and tell them we are going to do it, and this is how we're going to do it, and when we're going to do it, not just make a promise, which is unbelievable in the true sense of the word. Thank you. And Harriet from the Mail.
Thanks, Prime Minister. You said you want a national care service, but when will that come in, and can you commit to capping care costs? And secondly, if I may, you're heading to the US tomorrow to meet the President. Do you now support allowing Ukraine to use Storm Shadow missiles to strike targets inside Russia?
On social care, this has to be part of the change that we bring about, and it will be part of the change that we bring about. On the capping of the cost, promises were again made by the last government. They were delayed because they were undeliverable. We've looked at them. We don't think they're deliverable in the time frame the last government said, and that's why we've taken them down, and we'll review it. Now, it is an issue we're going to have to look at. I readily accept that. We will have it within the 10-year plan, but again, it's got to be done properly. It's got to be deliverable. On the going, obviously, as you mentioned, to Washington actually this afternoon for meetings tomorrow with the President. These are strategic meetings to discuss Ukraine and to discuss the Middle East. And so it'll be at that level of strategic discussion that we'll be involved in tomorrow with the President. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much for having me. Enjoy the rest of your conference, and thank you for everything that you do. Thank you.
Thank you to the Prime Minister, thank you to the Secretary of State, thank you to the entire Health and Social Care Ministerial team, and to Lord Darzi, whose report was the stimulus for all of this. I'm Alex Bayliss, I'm Acting Director of Policy Events and Partnerships at the King's Fund. And I just want to update you on some of the changes we've made to today's schedule to accommodate this. And I'm not going to respond to the Prime Minister's speech, but I will just offer 4 very quick reflections. One is that our analysis of how some of the last Labour government's achievements happened in the 2000s was about having this leadership at the top that really engaged the Prime Minister, not just